Hey, this is part 2 in a series of videos on Psalm 23. And again, we're going to make this very simple. We will take this passage of scripture one verse at a time and see what we can learn about the God we love. Let's dive in. Psalm 23 and verse 2. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. Such a beautiful passage of scripture. In his book, A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23, Philip Keller says that a sheep must have 4 things in order for it to lie down. Number 1, the sheep must have freedom from fear. No friction between others in the herd is number 2. Number 3, the sheep must be free from pests and parasites. And lastly, he says a sheep will not lie down unless it is free from hunger. In other words, these timid creatures will not lie down comfortably unless all of their needs are met. Like us, the sheep requires life's necessities to be comfortable, free from anxiety and care. On the other hand, the sheep must depend upon the shepherd because it cannot, for example, create an environment that leads to freedom from fear, as is you and I. A sheep cannot avoid friction with others in the herd since they often butt heads over turf and food, etc. We are very much the same. Sheep are helpless when fighting against parasites and pests, and the sheep does not know how to find the next pasture. If you've ever felt restless, lacking sleep, and spending your waking hours overly anxious, what David is saying is for you. He makes me lie down in green pastures. When David says he makes me lie down, he is saying that only the shepherd can meet the needs of the sheep. He makes me lie down, which means that only he can bring the level of comfort that causes the sheep to stop and rest in the pasture. The shepherd provides freedom from fear. His presence alone wards off the enemies that often harass you and I. Satan cannot harass those who Christ defends. I am no match for my enemy when I'm on my own. But the enemy is no match for me when I am with the shepherd. The shepherd removes friction between us and others. You see, he is the great mediator, and he has made it his goal, his primary goal, to bring estranged parties back together. The shepherd removes the pests that harass us by taking upon himself our diseases. He bore them all. And above all, the shepherd satisfies our hunger and thirst. He then brings us to a place of safety, unity, and harmony with others. He releases us from our pain and makes us lie down. And David says in another place, I will both lie down in peace and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Psalms 4 and verse 8. Safety is at a premium these days, and he alone can make us sleep in peace. Here's what I want to say to you. Any amount of distance between God and us will inevitably lead to anxiety. When we move from the shepherd's presence, we move from restfulness towards conflicts and restlessness. David is saying only he can make me lie down in green pastures. In the second half of the Bible, right there in Mark's gospel, we learn that a crowd came to Jesus having wandered through the wilderness for some time. When Jesus saw them, his heart was filled with compassion. And why was he compassionate? The Bible tells us because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. Mark chapter 6 and verse 34. This compassion led Jesus, the shepherd, to immediately spring into action to meet their needs. When the restless turns to him, his heart is moved with compassion, and he takes on the shepherd's duty right away, instantly. When we turn to him, he teaches us. And after a while, he says, sit down on the grass. Let's eat. Mark tells us, then he commanded them, meaning his disciples, to make them, meaning the people, to all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat in ranks, in hundreds, and in 50s. Mark chapter 6, verses 39 to 40. Jesus fed the multitude that day from 5 loaves and 2 fish, a miracle that they would never forget. A small boy's lunch multiplied into a cuisine that fed a multitude. I love how Isaac Watts, the songwriter, puts it. My shepherd will supply my need. Jehovah is his name. In pastures fresh, he makes me feed beside the living stream. The multitude was no longer afraid because Jesus was present. There were no conflicts in the group because Jesus was present. No pest to bother because Jesus was present. No food lacking because Jesus was present. Have you experienced the rest that David writes about in Psalm chapter 23, verse 2? Does the shepherd have full control over your life? For the sheep to find rest, it must submit to the leadership and guide of the shepherd. Are you in a place where you want to surrender fully to the shepherd, no longer trying to satisfy yourself with prodigal living? Do you no longer wish to walk through the thorns and briars, but instead lie down in the shepherd's field? Then friend, David wrote this for you. No longer do you have to face life in fear. No longer do you have to fight to keep peace in your relationships. No longer do you have to worry about the things that bother you. Your shepherd, if you surrender to him, he will make you lie down in green pastures. He will lead you beside still waters.